In 1984, a woman was sitting at home reading when she suddenly heard a very clear voice inside of her head. The voice told her, "Please don't be afraid. I know it must be shocking for you to hear me speaking to you like this, but this is the easiest way I can think of. My friend and I used to work at the Children's Hospital, Great Ormond Street, and we would like to help you." After a series of medical tests, including psychological assessments, the patient was diagnosed with a large benign brain tumor. Now, this voice continued to speak to her throughout the whole entirety of the medical testing. After she had surgery to remove said tumor, the patient heard from the voices one last time after regaining consciousness when she heard them say, "We are pleased to have helped you. Goodbye." She reported no post-surgical problems and never heard the voice again. My grandfather passed away just a few weeks after I was born. Never met the guy, never knew what he even looked like. When I was 5 years old, I started to see this man in our rocking chair. I called him the rocking chair man. My parents thought it was just that whole imaginary friend stage thing, but it started to bug them when I told them every single day about it. They finally questioned me about it, and I told them every detail I could remember, and finally they showed me a picture of a man. It was my grandfather. To this day, I'm 22 now, and every time I dream, he is in the background somewhere. I remember when I dreamed about my high school graduation, and I looked in the stands and I saw him with my parents. I like to think that he's just watching out for me and being there even though he's really not there. Several years ago, when my daughter was just over 3 years old, my husband and I were watching a TV show about 9/11. It was on or around our anniversary of the event. Now, my daughter, who was coloring nearby, looked up when the screen showed a plane hitting one of the World Trade Center buildings. She said to us, "I died there." Then she just went back to coloring like she hadn't even said a word. We had never talked to her about the concept of death and had never discussed 9/11 with her. Since then, she has not said anything else about it, but now if something comes on TV about 9/11, she says, "I don't want to watch this." The Hampton Court Palace in Surrey is thought to be one of the most haunted buildings in all of England. Now, according to their website, the castle is officially haunted by at least 3 specters. Catherine Howard, the screaming lady in the haunted gallery, has been spotted multiple times over the years by palace workers of all sorts and guests alike. The Grey Lady of Hampton Court Palace, who has been spotted roaming the palace since her tomb was moved back in 1829. The palace's most notable haunting, however, has to be of Skeletor, the creepy apparition that was caught on the palace's CCTV back in 2003. The palace officials explain on their website. On 3 consecutive days, palace security staff were called to close one particular fire door near the palace's introductory exhibition. On the first day, CCTV footage showed the doors flying wide open with great force, but there was nothing to reveal. Why? On the second day, the same thing happened, but this time a ghostly-looking figure in period dress suddenly appeared on the screen and closed the doors. They said that on the third day, the doors opened up again, but there was no further sign of the ghostly doorkeeper anywhere. About 10 years ago, I was only 8 years old and I was visiting my dad at his house. My stepmother was in the kitchen at the time and I was in the family room. We both saw my father wearing a red flannel shirt and blue jeans, and he walked around the corner from the living room and started walking up the stairs. I followed him and called his name as he went up the stairs. He turned back and looked right at me, got to the top of the stairs, and then went around the corner. I called his name once more. Then, from the living room, my dad popped his head up over the couch and asked what I wanted. Now, he had been asleep on the couch the entire time, yet both my stepmother and I clearly saw him, wearing the clothes he had on the whole day and all, go from the living room up all the way up the stairs. It was the strangest thing I've ever seen. Both my stepmother and I still remember it and talk about it to this day. Also, it was in broad daylight, so there was no way it was some uncanny illusion of the night. When my oldest sister was little, I want to say like around 3 years old, she asked my then pregnant aunt to pick her up and to hold her. My mother said that she was like, "She can't pick you up, honey. She has a baby in her tummy." And then my little sister had said that the baby is dead. My mother freaked out, but my aunt and grandma were fine and were just telling my mom it was all good. She was just a toddler and, didn't know what she was saying. Well, lo and behold, my aunt goes to the doctor the very next day for a routine pregnancy checkup, only to find out that the baby had died. It still gives me the chills to this day just to think about. I was living in a house in Laguna Beach that had been there since the 1920s. In its history, it had been a speakeasy at one point, and also a brothel, and a house for smuggling illegal immigrants. Now, one day, my new wife and I were having an argument. I can't even recall what it was about, but she walked down the block to go get a cup of coffee and just to kind of cool off, and I was alone in the house. Now, from my bedroom, I could look across the hall into the bathroom, then through the bathroom and down the other hall. I was standing at my dresser, and I just noticed movement out of the corner of my eye, and I happened to look down there. There was an, honest to God, this gives me goosebumps just typing it out, but 17 years later, a black figure. It was maybe 3 feet tall, and it was only vaguely humanoid. It looked like black scribbles, like somebody had scribbled a human shape, but the scribbles moved like electricity arcing. That's the best way to describe it. There was no sound that I could remember, but I distinctively remember when I saw it, I wasn't afraid. Just, what the hell? Then it noticed me looking at it, and I can't say it turned around, it just focused on me. Then I was terrified. I didn't move and I didn't scream, nothing. I was just frozen in place because this thing just came at me. It rushed down the hall towards me. I had no idea what it intended, but as soon as I had entered the bathroom, the door closed to me and just slammed shut on it. That's when I screamed. I yelled for my wife with everything I had, but she wasn't home. I went outside into the daylight and it didn't go back in until she got home about 10 minutes later. My wife never did believe me. A young man in Lansing, Michigan hears a strange two-toned whistle that seems to come from out of nowhere. Oddly enough, this incident was repeated at random intervals throughout his life and always left him with a feeling of intense dread. The last time he heard the sound, he managed to take a video of the whistler, though he is still no closer to figuring out who or what seems to be watching and following him wherever he goes. We saw a figure steering a canoe about 20 meters offshore. Sarah had decided to go get more beers from the car, leaving me alone to stare at this mystery person. And then, of course, they whistled at me. My entire body was frozen and covered in goosebumps. It was the exact same whistler from my childhood, more than a decade earlier. I looked at the figure, but it was much too dark to discern who it could possibly be. They were wearing a hat. When they were perpendicular to the shore from me, they stopped paddling, turned the canoe to face directly at me, and whistled right at me. I was so frightened I stood up and shouted at them, "Who are you?" They didn't say anything, just whistled a couple more times, turned the canoe 180 degrees, and paddled out of sight. Room 428 at Wilson Hall is permanently closed. Students at Ohio University The 9th oldest public university in the entire United States are not allowed to so much as enter the dorm room due to the numerous reports of hauntings and dangerous paranormal activity in the room. Wilson Hall was reportedly built on an Indian burial ground, because that always ends well. Spiritualists claim that the building is located at the center of a pentagram formed by 5 such ancient cemeteries, lending this geographical position extra powers of either safety or evil. In the 1970s, a male student had died under mysterious circumstances in room 428. Years later, a female student used what she perceived as the room's energy to practice rituals, such as astral projection, during which the human spirit is said to leave the body and travel about at will. Not long after moving in, this student died as well, reportedly from slitting her own wrists. Ever since these 2 student deaths, anyone who've lived in the room reported terribly scary occurrences at all hours of the day and night. Objects flown across the room and smashing against the walls, students hearing voices and whispering and even shouting, even though no one is there. The door would often open and then slam shut of its own accord. Stranger still, demonic faces kept appearing in the wood grain of the room's door. Although the school replaced the door many times, the tortured, ghoulish faces reappeared every single time. Eventually, the room would become too frightening, and the university feared another student death could result from it. So, they decided to seal the door shut forever. This is the only known case where a dormitory room has been sealed off in the entire United States to this day. When I was around 20 years old, a few years ago, I kept having dreams about a woman with long black hair named Aurora. They were different dreams, but for some reason, her distinct face and name always ended up in them. It got to the point to where I would wake up frustrated and confused, just trying to Google her name or find out how I was connected with her somehow. After a few months, she stopped showing up, and I just dismissed it altogether, thinking my brain was just being a scumbag or something. Now, fast forward a few years later, Halloween 2009. I'm in the car with a friend, stopped at a gas station. I'm about to pull out and merge onto a highway when I get a phone call from a random number I don't recognize. So I stopped the car, but no one answered. There was a person behind me who grew impatient, honked, and then swerved in front of me instead of waiting for 2 seconds for me to move. Second, they get on the highway. A silver Civic loses control of their wheel and crashes into the car that swerved in front of me. Now, I called the police immediately and just waited there at the gas station for them to come. Turns out the drivers of both vehicles died. It 100% would have been me if I hadn't gotten that phone call. Called it back a few hours later out of gratitude and curiosity. Rang 3 times and then went to voicemail. Hi, you've reached Aurora. Please leave your name and number. I have never had goosebumps like that in my entire life. I called it again the very next day because I was just that confused about the whole situation. Some woman answers, we get to talking, and I tell her my entire story, including the dreams I had. She tells me she doesn't know how I got her number and that she never called me as far as she remembers. Weird. I ask her if she has a Facebook to confirm if she is in fact the woman in my dreams. Well, I checked her Facebook and you guessed it. Holy shit, it's her. Hey everyone, I hope you enjoyed today's video. If you enjoy my content, go ahead and hit that big ol' subscribe button and we'll have a bunch more creepy, paranormal, scary stories out to you. And remember, always fear what lurks beneath.